Welcome back to Count Me In. I'm your host, Adam Larson, and today I'm excited to reconnect with Mike Wallace, who joined us 4 years ago to discuss ESG metrics for accounting and finance professionals. Now in 2024, Mike has taken an innovative role as the Chief Decarbonization Officer at Persefoni AI. In this episode, we'll explore the rising importance of carbon accounting for accountants and the groundbreaking tools being developed to streamline this process. Mike will also share insights on the evolving regulatory landscape, real-world examples like the UK's National Health Service, and practical steps for businesses big and small to stay ahead of their sustainability efforts. Packed with actionable advice and cutting-edge strategies, this conversation is one you won't want to miss. So let's dive right in with Mike Wallace. Well, Mike, I'm really excited to have you back on Count Me In as a guest. Last time you were here about 4 years ago, we focused on ESG-related metrics for accounting and finance professionals. But now here in 2024, you have a new title, which is Chief Decarbonization Officer for Persefoni AI. So maybe we can start off, because this is not a title we hear very much. You know, it's a very new title. So maybe we can start talking about what is a CDO and what does that mean for an organization?
Yeah, thanks, Adam, for having us again on the program. Really appreciate it, and always look forward to working with you on things like this, especially education materials for the accounting profession. It's becoming very prevalent that the accountants are picking up on carbon accounting quite aggressively now. Chief Decarbonization Officer is a brand new title in our field. When my CEO came to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about this title as a part of a promotion?" I'm like, "This is pretty interesting. It's not seen it before." So as you do, I looked it up on Google, and there are about 5 other people out there with that title, self-identified, right?
Yeah.
And so in LinkedIn, I look them up, connect with them, and have calls with them, find out what they're all doing. We're all doing different things. Some are in investment shops, some are in corporations, some are in government agencies, some are as consultants, right? And just about 3-4 years ago, the word decarbonization officer or decarbonization starts to take off, because once you understand your carbon footprint, then what are you going to do about it? How do you decarbonize? So some of the work that we do in that area is really helping people get the first understanding of their carbon footprint. And then always the next step is, now what do I do? And so my role here as Chief Decarbonization Officer is to help democratize carbon accounting. It's a key focus of Persefoni. And so what does that mean? I am out there as much as I can trying to find strategic partnerships like IMA and AICPA and other associations where the professionals need to understand these issues. And so in these cases, when we're partnering with associations, we can help scale those professionals really quickly, and we can scale in the thousands of people or numbers because your associations have very large numbers. The other thing about the multiplication aspect of this is that most of the professional associations also have accreditations that they provide to their members when they take a certain number of hours. Well, now we're doing that kind of training. We can go into some more of that detail in a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing how easy it is to overlook something as important as carbon accounting. And maybe we can take just a step back and talk about why is carbon accounting so important for today's accountant? You know, it's something that's been coming up more and more. And like last time we talked, we were focused on some of the metrics and stuff like that. But now carbon accounting is the name that's kind of taken on. So maybe we can discuss that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, it was just before I joined Persefoni. It was the spring of 2021, and that's always the common time. I was a partner at ERM, a large consultancy, and the springtime is the time when people are doing their annual sustainability reports. They're also getting ready to file their CDP reports. We're coming out of COVID, and some time lags were going on. A lot of catch up was happening around that time. And I remember very distinctly that summer, I had 4 CSOs, Chief Sustainability Officers, call me in a panic because their CEOs had made commitments on stages publicly about going net zero. And while that's great, in many of the cases that they don't fully understand their scope 3 footprint. That's the biggest gap in everyone's analysis right now. So that was what led me to looking around for solutions. We've been doing carbon accounting in spreadsheets for years. The greenhouse gas protocol that drives all this is 25 years old. And as a good consultant at engineering firm like ERM, we wanted to be very, very detail oriented. And the tool that we had was an Excel spreadsheet. So I meet this fella, Kentaro Kawamori, at Persefoni, and he gives me a demonstration of his tool, of the solution that he's built. He comes from a software background. He's been in the software space since he was 16 or 15. He's a coder himself.
Yeah.
And when he came up with this idea, he was actually the chief information officer at Chesapeake Energy. And he was experiencing the same thing that I was experiencing with my clients almost around the same time at Chesapeake. They're getting letters from BlackRock and other investors. They're getting pointed to things like CDP and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And he realized through his conversations with his executive team, they're spending a lot of time and money on something that's very manual that maybe could be automated. And that was the Persephone moment. That's when he came up with this idea of creating almost the ERP system for carbon accounting, or some people would say the TurboTax of carbon accounting.
Yeah, when you and I were chatting about this a few weeks ago, one of the things you mentioned to me that you were kind of reaching the limits of the carbon accounting mathematics. And so what does that mean as we're moving beyond the spreadsheets into systems like what Persephone's doing? What does that mean as we kind of move beyond what what we've already been doing so far?
So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is a multi-stakeholder nonprofit entity that was created by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and the World Resources Institute. The protocol itself was originally started about 25 years ago, but it needs to go through upgrades and expansions. So so in scope 3, there are 15 categories, and in those categories are various areas where you really need to go deep. Category 1, purchased goods and services. Category 15, financed emissions. And in those different areas, over the course of time, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the steering committees that were involved just didn't have the time to get down in the weeds of each and every calculation you're going to make. So, for instance, there's an average estimation that you can apply to the dollars spent on airline flights, right? Now, we all know that we fly exact miles, and we can get that mileage right from our tickets now. So you don't need to use that estimation anymore. But now I'm getting into work with clients like Merits and Airmark, where we're literally on the edge of where the math needs to be. Merits is a large events producer. They do events all over the world. Events have massive footprints. And if you're Merits, you're trying to organize tens of thousands of people coming to a city, and you're thinking about the airline travel, the bus travel, the hotel rooms. And you can't possibly get 10,000 hotel rooms all calculated by square footage. You take a rough estimate. But the world has not accepted a common estimate yet on a typical hotel room. And so that's where industry groups and general use specialists in this area will get together and they'll talk about this. Well, the average hotel room in the world is like this, right? And it's set up this way. But think of the hotels you've stayed in. They're also very different. So to get an agreement on that is one thing. And then to start using that emissions factor is a whole other thing. Same thing with Aramark. They're getting into the weeds of food. They are a food services company. So if you think about their latest impact report, they'll explain they're providing services to hospitals, universities, corporate campuses. And think about when you go into a cafeteria, you see all the packaged goods that are coming from Pepsi and Coke and Mars and others. Those are pretty well documented and you can have a pretty good mathematics around it. But then you go over to the grill area where you're going to get your protein and think about what's the average salmon's emissions factor, right? Well, I caught it here, I moved it here, I then processed it like this, transported it here. So that's in the weeds kind of detailed calculation that's still not fully baked. And so that's some of these areas where we're really getting into the weeds. And it's an area where accountants are going to be needed.
Well, it's a whole new level of, looking at your supply chain. Because before it was just like, oh, I'm just taking this and sending it here and sending it there. There's my supply chain. But we're taking it all the way down and looking at all elements of that supply chain in a whole new fashion, which it adds a bunch of new numbers in. And like you said, not everything is standardized. So one number may come from this hotel chain, this number may come from this place, this number may come from this place, and they don't line up, and you're not having apples to apples in a sense. And so how are we going to get around that? Is it going to take the world coming together and saying this is what we do, or or is there like country by country, or how are we going to get over that hump?
It's a bit of both. And, you and I have known each other for a long time. There's a constant churn in the standards world
Yeah.
and the evolution of standards and consolidation of standards and sometimes the sunsetting of certain standards. We've seen a great, collaboration and alignment come about because of the IFRS Foundation and the ISSB. So I'd recommend any of the listeners out there definitely want to turn into the ISSB and understand the standards that they're developing because they're being adopted by countries around the world. And in there, they will refer to things like the greenhouse gas protocol too. So there is an alignment. People aren't
Mhm.
just making up something new and then saying, go do it however you want. There is already right now the WRI or the greenhouse gas protocol itself has a call for technical experts out. So again, the accountants need to be there, and maybe
Yeah.
that's a call to IMA to get involved directly as an institution, but also to bring some of your best brains to that working group. They need the resources. They're a nonprofit, and they need more people at the table. And we want to be there figuring out this math with them. We don't want someone who's never worked in a certain industry to be figuring this out for us. And so you'll see different industries have come together, like the cement industry came together and worked with WRI to figure out better mathematics on the cement industry's issues. Who better to do that than the industry itself, right?
Yeah.
And then you're working with this multi-stakeholder global organization to do this. You then have some credibility when you use that math. There's still going to be a lot of areas where we're estimating, and that's acceptable to estimate on things like this. You just need to explain it, and that's where you get into the accounting profession again. Like, what was my methodology, my logic for doing this, and why did I do it this way? So what you often see, and what accountants and consultants will often do, is benchmark. And so you're working with any particular company, or if you're a company doing this yourself, there is actually a lot of data out there. You should look at your peers, especially your European peers in your sector, because they're generally 5 to 7 years ahead of us on their adoption and disclosure of this kind of information. So those are some resources that you might want to think about as you do this.
Definitely, for sure. I mean, it's really important to see what your peers are doing and connect and join associations and get connected and get out there and see what other people are doing to make sure that we're all connected. And as you were saying those things, I can't help but wonder, what about the small to medium sized businesses who might not have the financial capital, as those examples that you gave, who are able to track those things down to that smaller level? What can they do to kind of get started on this path? When they may not have the resources that the bigger companies have to calculate these things to that level. Are there some things they can do to get started and be ahead of the curve?
Yeah. So one thing that works in the U.S. is that most of our utility companies here can give you a carbon equivalent to your utility bill. It might
Mm,
very well be on your utility bill. And if it's not, you can call them up and say, I'm a customer. This is what I need. That's going to give you your scope 2 number. Same with
gotcha.
natural gas that you might be bringing in. So the utilities in America are fairly adept at this now. So that's going to help you there. The scope 1 are all the things that you turn on inside of your own operation that then combust. And that could mean the vehicles you own too. So maybe you want to electrify your fleet. There might be money out there through tax incentives to start to do that. There might be other ways to electrify some of your equipment around the company, right? So, and there are tax incentives out there, especially for small, medium enterprises. So there are resources like that. We, as part of Persephone's plan, and when I met Kantaro, he told me at the very beginning, he said, well, here's what we're going to do as a company. We're going to build the tool, but we're also going to develop in Persephone Academy because we want to teach everyone how to do this.
Mm,
And that academy will be evergreen because these regulations are always changing. And so the academy is there not only for our clients, our customers, but for the entire world. And I was surprised by that. Like, that's a really interesting model. Just give it away. But his vision is to democratize carbon accounting, and that's how we do part of it. The other thing he said is, I'm going to build a free version of this tool. And
mm,
so about 8 weeks ago, we released the free version. Anybody in the world can log in and start putting their data into the cloud. And it's data that you would have at your own desk if you're running a company, right? You
yeah.
might have to talk to a few people and package it up and put it in manually into the initially, but you're going to have now a cloud-based system of record that allows you to keep track of it throughout the year. Think about us personally when we do our taxes. Do we do it every month? No, do it at the very end of the year. That's typically the way humans behave, and that's understandable. But
Yeah.
at least having it in a cloud and not in a spreadsheet that you have to go find and wonder out, like, did I do all the calculations right? Have they changed? Everything that's all the math we're taken care of in the cloud.
Hmm.
So I highly recommend, any accountant out there listening, tap into it, test it out, see how it works, because you're going to have some customers that are going to need this kind of help.
Yeah, they definitely are. So, I encourage everybody to check the link in the show notes to check out Persefoni and see what they're doing and connect with Mike for sure. And maybe we can talk a little bit about some of this education that you're doing. That uh, how are we, how can we? Because it seems like as an accountant and actually any profession, it seems like we keep having to add on all these new things we have to know. And especially for an accounting and finance team, they're already seemingly overworked in many of the other tasks that they have. So as we're recognize the importance of carbon accounting, how do you talk to your business, your team, and say, this, we need to add this and this is why? Like, what is the why that we're saying to that team, making sure that we're getting buying from our constituents?
I think what we see in the field generally over the course of the 20 years that ESG has been here and I've been working at it is that you need a multi-stakeholder team
Mm,
across different functions that comes together and works on these issues, the broader ESG landscape. You're going to need HR for DE&I type of issues. You're going to want facilities for energy related issues, health and safety for how you care for your people, et cetera. And in today's situation, fast forward to carbon accounting and Persefoni, it was interesting because I've gotten to know these associations over the course of my career, but when I land here at Persefoni, it's also the same time that the SEC's proposed rule is out, and being drafted, and it's going to be announced. But we also have developments in other parts of the world that are also on U.S. companies' minds around carbon accounting and disclosure. And there certainly was that years worth of pressure from investors that pushed them to be thinking about it. So you come into a company in today's status, you might very well, for carbon accounting through a software solution, you're probably going to want your chief information officer or your chief technology officer involved, because we're going to want to access and make automation happen with outside systems and internal systems so that we can just pull this data immediately into the platform.
mm,
You're going to want finance. Chief financial officer is the one that buys most of the stuff for the company. That's where a lot of the initial estimates can come from. What did you spend on these things? I can then equate into a CO2 equivalent for you pretty quickly. Also, the CFO is the person that pays for software, and they're familiar with different software programs. Now, they would appreciate Persefoni because we're aimed at that accountant financial professional. So as we go through all of this, we start to do webinars and in-person programs with the likes of Financial Executives International, AICPA, National Association of Corporate Directors, the Society for Corporate Governance Professionals, um, and a couple of others. And these are all C-suite risk finance types of people, right? Including the legal teams who are working on whether or not to disclose under these certain regulatory schemes that are out there. And what happens is we start doing more and more of these programs because the demand is pretty great. And we're getting hundreds of attendees to these sessions, and we start to then formalize that into packages. And now we've got probably 50 different programs we've put on with these associations, probably trained close to 10,000 people. And in most of those cases, almost every course, the association itself is giving that professional 1 hour continuing education credit. So that's how the field has evolved. In just the last 3 years that I've been here at Persefoni, that's just now happening. Just like my title's new, there's a new title called ESG Controller,
mm,
right? That wasn't
mhm.
around a few years ago. Now there's actually several different variations of that title, and you can look on LinkedIn at some of the posts we're making. We've done studies on this with FEI and digging into what does the profession need? What do professionals want to know? And if you're in the different seat around the C-suite, like board level, you don't need to know how to calculate a footprint, but you need to understand that there are standards and regulations out there. And then in 2024, your company should at least be at par with your industry, right? You don't want to be lagging too much. You might not want to be too far out in advance. C-suite, CFO, CEO, chief risk officer, chief information officer, chief general counsel, all of these professionals need to understand their role when it comes to carbon accounting and disclosure.
Yeah, because they're the ones who are going to be held accountable the when the public comes and asks, "Hey, why aren't you doing this?" When your customer comes and says, "Hey, what's the number? What's the information?" And if you're not ready for that, you might end up losing customers. And there's so many other risks involved if you're not keeping up or at least getting close to where it's at. And I can understand with what you're saying how important that is for these C-suite level people to be on top of that.
Yeah. I mean, I got a case in point where we had, the SEC proposed rule is in its public comment period. We're doing what we do at Persefoni and doing a lot of this education and outreach. We have a general counsel that wants to talk about the rule. So we talk about the rule and where it might go. We actually have Christina Wyatt and Emily Pierce on the team, both from the SEC. So two amazing experts. Christina actually held the pen and wrote that rule, right? The original form
Wow.
of it. And Emily was the international affairs liaison for the SEC. So she's out in the world talking to all the other regulators, feeding back to Christina and figuring out like what's the best way to align this so that we don't put too much burden on the companies, but
Hmm.
also the SEC's looking out for the investors' interests. So we need comparable, assurable, reliable, timely data. Right now, interestingly, this general counsel comes to us and says, this is what we do. We're a medical company. We supply to all the big hospitals and others, and not so sure that we really need to do this right now. And given our size, maybe it's necessary, maybe it's not. Talk to them about the SEC rule, not knowing when it's going to actually come out. And they just go, well, we're just going to wait and see. We'll see what happens, right? In the meantime, they're international. So there are business things happening. And we explain to them the CSRD in Europe and developments in Asia, where you also have market share. Well, about 3 months later, the UK's National Health Service, because the UK has got its own rules, right? And they're telling all of their own departments in the UK government, you will go out and procure in a responsible way and towards climate goals that the country has set. An RFP comes out from the UK's National Health Service to, we don't know how many medical equipment companies, but that company we talked to got that RFP. And right in the center of the RFP is this nice little box that just says, fill in your scope 1, 2, and 3 and explain how you got the numbers. Now you're at a competitive situation. You're holding that RFP. You might have 4 or 5 or 10 people that are competing with you, right? And I know when I've ever responded to an RFP, I want to dot every I and cross every T and put my best foot forward. So I'm going to give you the best price, best delivery time, highest quality product, my best team, and now I got to give you my carbon information.
Mm.
So that company came racing back to us. They actually sent us that RFP, and then we found it online. It's a public document because it comes from the National Health Service.
Wow.
I don't know how many others received it. I don't know how they all responded. And I'm also curious about the NHS's, receipt of those RFPs, what they're doing with it. But that's the future. I've never seen that in the 30 years I've been at this.
Wow.
I've never seen that type of RFP out there and go public. It's just a good fortune that we could see it because it was a public agency out of the United Kingdom.
That is amazing. And if you're not preparing now, when those RFPs come, it's not like something you can just throw together in like a week or so, because usually the RFPs don't have a long shelf date. You need to get them out sooner than later. And so if you're not ready, it's not something you can just turn around in like a day or two.
Right. Now imagine there's going to be someone that responds to that and says, here's my scope 1, 2, and 3. Here's my entire climate report and strategy.
Mm.
And oh, by the way, I had it assured, right?
Oh, wow.
Now you're receiving that RFP and you're like, I got 10 competitors to deal with here. I'm going to look at all of them and see which, stack them up. And then I'm going to figure out which one I'm going to pick. It's amazing where this is going, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we receive these RFPs too. We're a carbon accounting company, but some of those are big clients. You see them on our website. They've made commitments, and in their own RFP process to us, we have to answer those questions. But we're set up to do that. I mean, we're going to walk the talk. We're a carbon accounting company.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing for like a healthcare system like that is you might put that RFP out, and you might say to 100 suppliers, we are committed to net zero, therefore you need to be, because everyone's someone's scope 3. So whatever you're doing is going to affect my footprint, right? Please go measure your footprint. Those 100 suppliers, how do you know how they're doing it? There are free tools from UK's DEFRA, which is the equivalent of EPA. There's a free tool from the EPA. all the calculations are close, but they're not the exact same. They might be, one supplier might use a consultant, one supplier might use an intern from a university, one supplier might just be doing the math on their own in the back of a napkin. You wouldn't know unless you actually instructed them to use the same approach and instructed them to then also get it verified. That's where we're going. I've witnessed it 3 or 4 times in my career around different environment, health, and safety, and quality and ESG issues. We're definitely going to this point of like, fill in the 3 simple boxes. I want numbers. I don't want lengthy qualitative statements. Numbers. It's 2024 and the greenhouse gas protocol has been around for 25 years. You at least have to know scope 1 and 2.
Yeah.
If you don't know scope 1 and 2 by now, we don't have an accounting issue. We might have a governance issue. We need to talk to management.
Yeah. And what if you're a listener in this podcast, you're an accounting finance professional, and you're like, and you look at your organization and you're like, we don't have a scope 1 and 2 defined. What are we doing? How would you approach your CEO, your CFO, and all those folks and saying, hey guys, we need to get on the ball? Like, what would that message be to them?
It's 2 stages of benchmarking that I've always done for clients over the years. Stage 1 is look at your peer set, your sector, right? I think that RFP is going to come out because that National Health Service needed some new things, and they're shopping for things in a certain sector. So the industry, right? So when you look at your own industry, don't just look at American peers. Look at European peers and look at Asian peers. You're going to see a lot of differences, right? The next thing you do is you look at your biggest customers. If NHS is my customer, I would be monitoring all the public statements they're making about the future and where they want to go. If they're going to go carbon neutral, it's going to affect me because I'm one of their biggest suppliers. I better get my ducks in a row. And so if you're really focused on customer service, and if the customer is always right, look at your top 10 customers and benchmark them. See which sort of commitments they've made. And if you have the time to, maybe expand it to the top 20, right? And then if you have more time, look at what the industry associations are doing that you're selling into to see what the associations are telling their members. Because, this is a ripple effect. This stuff rolls downhill,
It really does. And I think it's just more and more important now to just be on top of that and connect with organizations like yours and making sure that your organization is ahead of the game as the world is rapidly changing, and we need to make sure that we're on top of it so that we can be best for our industries, be best for our customers, and best for the planet as well. It's super important now.
Yeah. The game has changed tremendously. And even though we've got this, political situation going on here with the election on the horizon and the SEC rule in limbo right now, U.S. Chambers suing California for their rules and suing the chamber. But that doesn't really matter. If you're doing international business, which there really isn't anyone that's not doing international business.
Yeah.
There will inevitably be an important customer that comes to you and says, I know my footprint, but I need to know your footprint. Please tell me you can figure this out. I like our partnership. I like our relationship. You've been a great supplier, but it's been 5 years and it's time for me to go out for an RFP and get bids. And I want to see if you're capable. That's happening.
It is. Well, Mike, I really appreciate you coming back on the Count Me In. It's always wonderful to talk with you, and we love having you on and hearing your insights in this area. And just thank you so much again for coming on the podcast.
Always a pleasure, Adam. Thank you, and thank you to IMA for letting us be with you today.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.